Welcome to another episode of Hames Henderson, Chilliwack Now. As with all our episodes, we'll be exploring issues we think are relevant to Chilliwack Now. As always, Paul Henderson, the editor of the Chilliwack Progress, is my co-host. Paul.
Thanks, Clint. Happy to be here and helping to bring clarity to the important issues of the day. When we return, we'll be focusing on an issue that will be playing a bigger and bigger part of our lives in the coming days, weeks, and months, post-COVID. Where do we go now? What changes will we see in our lives? And most importantly, how has this impacted some of the most vulnerable in our communities?
We'll be back with more after we hear these messages.
We're back, and now we're going to talk about COVID-19 and where we're at and where we're going.
And I can't think of a better place to start with that conversation than with our MLA, Kelli Paddon. Kelli, welcome back to our show. Both Paul and I are interested in what the world looks like with respect to COVID-19. We had a little conversation before that said, I used the phrase post-COVID, and you said we're not post-COVID. And as I said, the world seems to want to believe that we're post-COVID when you look around, and yet we know we're not. We're still dealing with the impacts of the pandemic. Where's the government now on COVID-19? We're moving kind of into a new phase. What's the government's sort of perspective on COVID-19 at this point in time?
Well, great question, and I'm really glad to be talking about it because, like you said, now that we're post-COVID, well, we're not post-COVID, and for a lot of people, it's still really daily. There are a lot of considerations for them, and to answer your question, where's the government on COVID now? It's the same place it's been during this entire process. Where the government is at is focused on protecting healthcare, focused on protecting people's health and their lives, focused on protecting the economy as well. But the main driver, the best thing anybody can do in a post-COVID place is to make sure you're vaccinated, make sure you're getting your boosters. It protects you and your families and the people around you. And as we move into this, we recently did away with the requirement to have the proof of vaccination for a lot of places. Although I know a lot of businesses are still planning on using them for a while. For some people, that's an amazing opening up. And for other people, it's actually means a return to their home because they may not be able to be out and about. So a lot of things to consider, but the government is continuing to move forward in a science-based way, continuing to work and listen to the direction of the public health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry. There's a continuation of monitoring so that we can watch for case positivity in different ways. And I know that Minister Dix and Dr. Henry explained how that would be in a recent announcement. And there's also going to be adjustments as we know better and can do better, and as we know more and can do more. And so we'll continue to follow the science and really have the focus on protecting lives.
Go ahead.
I'm curious what you hear from constituents. A lot of people have been, maybe not a lot of people, but a section of people complain that there were too many restrictions for too long. Mm-hmm. And then now that the mask mandates are off in most places, including schools, we're hearing from a lot of people who are saying it was too soon, my children's vulnerable. What are you hearing from your constituents?
Yeah, so I have the honor of serving Chilliwack-Kent, and so I have a range of communities that I serve. For the most part, I was hearing not a lot. For the most part, it was when I was talking directly with people that they would offer their opinions, except for there was a few constituents who were reaching out are reaching out very regularly, very strong opinions about vaccinations or the public health officer and their decisions about what should and shouldn't be decided, a lot about jobs, a lot about the proof of vaccination requirements, and travel, both locally and internationally. They were very much against the restrictions that happened. I am assuming they continue to be. And people who were not in agreement with the vaccinations generally as well. That being said, I'm also hearing from a group, probably about the same size, of people who are, vulnerable because of their immunity, or who have children who are vulnerable because of their immunity, and this opening up and the, no mask mandate, all these legal requirements being taken down. They're very fearful that they're fearful that it may be too soon, and second, that it puts their loved one in particular at risk. And so it's a balancing, and the public health officer understands it's a balancing, and we have to follow the evidence, we have to follow the science. So politically, politicians aren't making these health choices because we're not qualified. Would it be easier maybe to have gone here or there? It might have been politically easier, but I don't believe it would have protected more people. And at the end of the day, I don't believe we'd be where we are now.
I think the thing for me in looking at 2 years or just over 2 years of the pandemic has been the divisions that it's created between people. And people have strong opinions, as you've said, about a number of these things. And now that we're hopefully watching the pandemic ease and sliding back into what looks more like a normal life, we've got to repair some of that. And I know there are some extreme opinions that likely will never kind of repair, but there are other sort of divisions that I think we need to try to heal. Has that been a subject of any discussion on a provincial level that says, how can we start messaging about being kind in a kind of different way now? Yeah. Is that a discussion that's going on at all?
I think we're always talking about it because it's always important that people are united. We need all the ideas and all the hands at the table just to move forward together as a province, not only about this, but in general. That being said, there are strong opinions, and these are life or death opinions in some respects. If you've lost a family member due to COVID, you're very unlikely probably to have a whole lot of understanding about why restrictions might be being reduced if you feel like that was too soon. So I think we need to understand that everybody, and people in the Fraser Valley and Chilliwack and Chilliwack-Kent, in multiple ways recently, people have been traumatized by this. There's a lot of grief around this, and people grieve and respond and heal in very different ways. So although I may not agree, doesn't mean I can't understand. And getting back to a point where we have the personal bandwidth and the emotional bandwidth to be able to do that, it's going to take some time. But I have every confidence. And one of the reasons I have that confidence is because no matter what was happening as far as the divisiveness around vaccinations or COVID, when the flooding hit and when the land started moving because of all that water, people came together. People from every corner of the community, they all came together, they worked together, and they still didn't agree about vaccinations or restrictions, but they took care of our community and they took care of the people in our community. So I have every hope that we will be able to get there. We just need to allow time to heal.
It's a great analogy. Thank you for that, Kelli. Our guest has been Kelli Paddon, who, as always, has provided some great insight into an issue that we know is important to folks. Right, Paul?
That's right. And
thank you so much, Kelli, for being here.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Okay, we're back. So there's no topic more discussed these days as people return to work and events and restaurants than what it's going to be like as we pull out of this pandemic, as we approach some sort of a new normal, and what the post-COVID world will look like. So we have a couple of guests to talk about that.
Thanks, Paul. Our first panelist is Krysandra Wilson. And Krysandra has a master's degree in counseling psychology and is a registered clinical counselor here in BC, and currently working in the K-12 system, primarily with children as a behavioral and trauma-informed therapist. And that's a really exciting world for us to be talking about. And our other guest is Dr. Carin Bondar. And you'll remember Carin from many times that we've done shows about different topics, but I wanted Carin to be here specifically because for a bunch of different reasons. One, you're an educator and you're working with young adults, I guess we can call university students. You're also a member of the school board, so you have your finger on that pulse. And for both of you, you're both moms with kids at home that you're looking after. I'm not sure how you balance all of those things in your life, but I really want to, I'm sure it is. I really wanted to talk about some of that, but also the real important discussion about are kids as resilient as we tend to think they are in schools, like through this last 2 years? Krysandra, you've been working in that system now for 2 years. How would you measure the resiliency level of the kids that you're working with as they struggle through this pandemic and all these weird things we've asked them to do in that time?
Yeah, and that's a really great question, and I am always amazed and blown away by the resiliency of most kids. You know, as adults, we find our stress response really sensitive and heightened to the unknown and to the fear of what this virus is, and kids kind of take it in stride, and I think we have to look at a bunch of different factors. You know, their age, their history, whether there's any trauma in there, their levels of anxiety to begin with, so that, you know, a bunch of different factors are mixed in there as well. But yeah, seeing the resiliency in kids and kind of just going with the flow of, you know, what's happening, wearing masks. I have a 5-year-old and a 12-year-old, and for my 5-year-old, it was kind of just like, that's just the way things were, and she you know, would throw her mask on and it wasn't a big deal. Whereas for my 12-year-old, who, you know, she was older when we got into this pandemic, it was, you know, maybe a little bit tougher on her because it was new things that she wasn't used to and having to get used to. So I think there's a lot of different factors, but, you know, between my kids and the kids that I see at school, there was a very impressive amount of resiliency and just kind of going with what we had to do and making our way through it. So,
Carin, is that your experience at the university level as well?
Yeah, gosh, so much to think about. I agree. I'm delighted at, you know, seeing some of the final projects and things that come through from my students that have actually been able to pull really impressive things off during the pandemic. But I will say that it has been a tumultuous time. We, you know, as an instructor, I think I've just dialed back any kind of, you know, deadline or, you know, any kind of issue that students might face, really just making it easier for them to be successful in the classes. A lot of the students, of course, you know, when I get them, they're in their early 20s. I might have some moms as well in my classes that are dealing with their own children. I have students that come over for internationally that may be taking the class from another country or that are here but very isolated from their family and their communities. So I've certainly noticed that the pandemic meant a struggle for a lot of my students, but I will say we've met them where they're at. We're doing our best to keep them successful. That's basically, I tell them that's my goal. My goal is for you guys to be successful this, you know, semester.
Kind of fits with what Krysandra was saying, that
Yeah.
the younger kids, we wear a mask, that's cool. As they get older, they're going, wait a minute, this is different. My life is different, and as they get even older, it's more of a challenge.
Yeah, and I would also say, you mentioned your older child, it was a little harder for them. I had my oldest as well. I would say that was our largest struggle. They were 15 at the time, and by the time school was supposed to go back in, you know, we were off from spring break the whole rest of the year. By the time we were supposed to go back in the fall, it was a real mental health issue. So I would say those, you know, 10th graders, 11th graders, who could grasp some of the real dire problem we were having.
and I think we think of it too as, you know, as adults, we struggled with it because, again, we struggle with that uncertainty and the fear and not being able to control something and feeling like something is just so far outside of our control. And then you look at a child whose, you know, emotion regulation and brain isn't fully developed at that stage, and so their ability to, you know, kind of you know, do what they have to do to get through it, they look to us for our direction and how we're handling it. And so, you know, the stress of some adults, you know, that emotion is very contagious, right? So that's a deciding factor too on on how a lot of children handle it is just their response of their parents and caregivers as well.
Such a good point. Yeah.
Do you have any concerns, or what's your position on the long-term implications this might have for children going forward? How will they remember this? What will it be like, do you think?
Yeah, that's another great question, and definitely something that we're going to be seeing across the next few years, especially. The short term, we have that, that fear, uncertainty, frustration, anger, anxiety, depression that we're seeing already in a lot of the children and adults as well. The long term, we're looking at things like post-traumatic stress, right? And seeing how that's going to be a factor. We're looking at, social skills that were missed in the developmental years, especially the first few years of life is when children learn how to, socialize and how to use those interactions. And a lot of young ones had to miss out on those really important years. So over the next few years, when we start seeing those long-term effects, I think it'll be very eye-opening on what we have to do moving forward to be able to support these kids who missed out on kind of those, normal interactions that we had prior to COVID, and just figuring out how we can support them later on in life.
Yeah, there may be some unknowns even.
Yeah, absolutely.
What have they missed? We may not have even really realized or understood all of that
Absolutely.
yet.
And I don't think we've even scratched the surface in terms of, what these mental health long-term effects are going to be. I mean, we look at research and studies that have been done on previous viruses like the SARS virus and whatnot, and they did see effects of post-traumatic stress and whatnot, and that was, it seemed to be more controlled than what this one was. It was a shorter term thing, and so it will be very interesting to see what happens in the long term over the next few years of different tests and studies that will be done.
We recently did some principal, vice principal placements and interviews with the school board, and something that came up quite a bit, especially for the primary level principals, was this notion, this issue of the entire cohort of K this year, or of ones this year, who have, had their reality has been different. It's just been a totally different way to grow up. And teachers are working above and beyond, because students are coming that have a completely different skill set than they would have if they had been socialized normally, as Krysandra was saying.
And even something as simple as having a mask on your face all day and now not having your mask on. Do you see any anxiety in the classrooms that you're working with, or anecdotally as a trustee? Is there anxiety from kids taking their masks off and wondering if they're safe, and is that manifesting in what you're seeing?
I would say I have, for the most part, masks coming off at the university has been wonderful. And there are some folks that continue to wear them for their own safety, and I haven't noticed any kind of, harassment of those folks, which a lot of people are noticing. But I would say just the mere act of taking off our masks has allowed us to see each other smile again. And I'll tell you, I smile a lot, especially during my lectures, I teach a lot of heavy stuff, environmental science, and, things that's bad news. So it's just nice to be able to see my students, see their faces, see how they're reacting, so that I know how they're feeling or how they're reacting to material. Yeah, how about you? What is your experience?
Absolutely, I agree, and I really like your point on how there hasn't been any kind of harassment or, bugging of other kids when it comes to masks, and I've noticed that even at my school, K to 12, there hasn't been a lot of, why are you still wearing a mask? It's just, some kids are still wearing them, and other kids are more than happy to take them off, and I think that, it has been a learning curve, and getting back to your, that point of, has there been additional anxiety? And I've seen that from students as well, that some kids are going, I don't know if I should be wearing a mask, or if I should take it off, or is this okay? And I've even noticed myself, going into a grocery store and having that initial, like, oh, I forgot my mask. And it's like, oh, wait, I don't have to wear it anymore, right? And again, like my 5-year-old, she was so used to wearing one, and now it's like it doesn't even faze her that she's not wearing one. And then my 12-year-old is kind of more like, oh, should I be wearing a mask right now? Am I supposed to? And so it's been a little bit of both, and I think it's all going to get back into that cycle of getting into your own groove again and getting used to that. You know, when we were learning to put a mask on and to remember to wear a mask, it felt weird and foreign. And then it got to the point where that felt like it was normal. And so now we're kind of entering into that new normal of, you know, not having to wear one again, and it feels kind of like you're missing something. And so I think it's just kind of getting back into that cycle and of figuring out what our new normal looks like and kind of getting through our initial fear and anxiety of that.
Well, this is a perfect example of, I've been doing these interviews and now joined by Paul, which is a great pleasure over the last couple of years, and it's always with the people you're interviewing in another part of the building and joining them together by some screen magic, and here we are sitting together, which when we first started, I felt a little anxiety. But as always, it seems kids are way ahead of us in terms of sort of the water off the duck's back. Okay, well, I'll do that. Whereas adults are less so. And I guess one of the things that's really interesting to me is the dynamic where we've been so polarized. The pandemic is just one of those things that's polarized us. And did that happen in schools where there were people who held views that said, you know, we shouldn't have to wear masks and we shouldn't have to get vaccinated and we shouldn't do these things, and other people say, no, we have to do these things to keep us all safe. Did you experience that polarization among your students? I'm guessing among staff, but what about among students, say at the university? Did you get that happening there?
Yeah, you know, at the university, no. I would say that in my experience at the university, it's been really, you know, students at that level are generally very self-focused and often not terribly concerned about what others are doing, so long as they get their needs met in terms of what their academics are. But I will say, as part of the school board, we absolutely had some issues there. Although I would say that wasn't so much with the students themselves, it was more the parents. But we have had some struggles in that way, and that's been a little disappointing, I'll be honest.
Did Krysandra, at your school, was there pretty much everybody saying, yep, great idea, we're putting these masks on so we can get back to school? Was there a lot of tension or division that those regulations created?
Not a lot that I saw, kind of like what Carin was saying, you know, everyone's kind of just doing their thing so that we can try and get back to, you know, studies as usual and just trying to be in the school. My principal at my school was very, she just kind of had a one-track mind of, we are not closing the school, we are keeping it open, and we are going to do what we can to keep this school open. So it was very much a, you know, if somebody didn't have their mask on in the hallway, it was like an immediately, you know, go put on a mask. We need to make sure that we are in this together, that we are getting through this together. And so that was a very contagious way of thinking of, you know, just let's just, you know, get through this together. Yeah, it's not fun. Yeah, it's really hard. And yeah, it's frustrating sometimes. And, you know, for my job, I need to see people's faces, right? I work a lot with body language and the, you know, the expression that they have on their face. And that was a real shortcome for me, is not having that. And at the same time, you know, it's kind of thinking, you know, short-term pain for long-term gain, and that's kind of, you know, what we've been told for a long time. And so being able to band together and show students and teach students that, you know, this is a collective effort. It's not just about us individually. It's about working together so that we can make sure that we're keeping the school open so that we can continue our education. And so, yeah, again, same, you know, we had some parents that were, you know, through anxiety and, you know, fear and everything that we've all been experiencing throughout this. There's been a little bit of pushback with some things, but for the most part, I've been really happy to see kind of that band together collective nature of just getting through it.
Paul, you must, as the editor of the local paper, you're the guy that is on the front line whenever there's an issue like this in our community. So this must be encouraging to you to hear that there were some environments where there wasn't that huge division, because I'll bet you bore the brunt of that.
Yeah, for sure. We
as
saw,
an editor.
we see a lot of pushback and a lot of anger and a lot of rage and a lot of unprintable letters to the editor. You know, people just calling us every name in the book. They're calling, like, there was a real negative, a lot of real negativity out there. But But yeah, I do always keep that in mind, that it is the loud, just because they're complaining to me doesn't mean they represent a large cohort of population. And when I see at my kids' school, my kids both go to 2 different schools, and I see what you say, they're just completely resilient. They gotta wear a mask, you don't have to wear a mask. My kids play hockey, you gotta wear a mask in the rink, take it off. They just went with the flow. And there's the occasional parent who was not nice about it, but yeah, we get a lot of it at the paper for sure, and it can be challenging, but I always have to just let it water off a duck's
And I
back.
think oftentimes, those sort of very angry or very charged voices become quite loud. And those of us maybe that are, working in the school systems, we don't see a lot of it, but it's just that you hear about a lot of it because, those bad news travels fast, especially on, social media networks.
Yeah.
And so
I think the message is probably that there's hope. The world's
Yes.
not as bad as you might see it from time to
Poor
time,
Paul.
Paul. But
I keep that in mind, yeah, for
it
sure.
appears there's hope.
I think one thing that this whole situation has done, though, for all of us, but especially maybe the kids, is really give us an awareness for what it means to be a collective society, what it really means. Like, my actions really do have implications for other people. I think it's been a really important, message and lesson from the pandemic.
Yeah, some people hopefully will learn it.
We can dream, Clint.
That's
We can
true.
dream.
That's true.
So I think we're going to take a break now.
Okay, we'll take a quick break and then we'll come back and explore this topic. Thanks so much for what we've seen so far. It's been great. So it's time to take a short break and a word from our sponsor. We're back with our guests, Dr. Carin Bondar and Krysandra Wilson, and we're talking about some of the impacts we've seen in our communities and especially our kids over the course of this pandemic. Paul, you had a question that I think is just a darn good one.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, well, as the editor of the local paper, I'm on the front lines of a lot of feedback from the community, let's put it that way. A lot of angry feedback, a lot of supportive feedback, but journalists all over have faced a lot of abuse during this pandemic. But what I see through that is some of this division we've talked about, some of this real nastiness, some people who just don't want to sort of follow the public health orders, they don't believe the science, whatever it is. And a lot of friendships and family members have really struggled through this. And I'm just wondering if you think, how are we going to heal moving forward? Do you think this is this a permanent, do you have some permanent rifts in our society here?
I think that's a great question, and absolutely looking at, where we're at right now and just seeing the division in our nation, in our communities, across the world, and it seems really intimidating when it comes to the huge rifts that have been created as a result. And I am very optimistic and hopeful that there are ways to get through it. And I come from a perspective of just constantly being mindful in my own life and being present and knowing that, what happened in the past, we can't change it. The decisions that were made by others, we can't change them. And yes, when somebody has opposing views or doesn't align with how we feel things should have been done, it's very easy to become, defensive and be angry. And I think that, that there are points that we have a right to be angry about. And then, when it comes down to it, in order to move forward, we need to move forward. And I think that's what it comes down to, it's really easy to hold on to the anger and the frustration of what happened and the decisions that people have made. But we get stuck in that. And that's kind of how anxiety gets fed as well, is just getting stuck in what happened in the past, or, getting worried about what's going to happen in the future, whereas those are two things that we can't control. We can't change what happened in the past, and we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. So we can't hyper focus on those things, because it creates even more anxiety. And anxiety, we see fear and anger and sadness and all of those things that come along with it. So for me, moving forward and kind of having this reconciliation is the idea of, leaving what happened in the past and trying to move forward as best as I can. And just remembering too that for the most part, people are doing the best they can with what they have. And our initial primal instinct is survival. And so the decisions that people are making, a lot of it is based on fear. A lot of it is based on, influence from media and social media and all of those other things. And so the decisions that people are making are, what is my best chance of survival? And so we see a lot of these decisions that, maybe aren't backed by science, but are backed by, opinions that they've seen on the internet. And so it's more or less for me, trying to be compassionate and think, we don't have all the answers, and most people don't have all the answers, and they're just doing what they can and making decisions based on what they feel is best for them. So, we can hold a lot of resentment and anger and whatnot towards people, but in order to move forward, we have to just realize that, things happened, and we gotta figure out ways to kind of leave that where it is and figure out how we can go forward from there.
So many great points, and I think, that there's so much that can be done, and I think we're seeing what is the result of almost a perfect storm of, we have the pandemic, which is forcing a lot of us to go online more, which is then allowing algorithmic code to feed us more of the things we're already seeing, which has, in a lot of cases, really reiterated a lot of the divisiveness. And so I think what we have to be is aware that that our own personal soapboxes or whatever are being supported by algorithms that are working towards us that we're not even aware of. And also, to that point as well, I think, just thinking, I see you all on the socials, on the Twitters and all this, and there's just a lot. It's very easy. It's very easy for people to say something rude or to say something anger driven when there's just no consequence for it. And I've certainly, working in media as well, noticed that that's something that's always been around, but I feel as though the perfect storm of conditions that we've faced during the pandemic has really made it very easy and almost normal for people to really jump on each other online. So I really am with you, Krysandra. I hope that we can remember that at the end of the day, we are really working towards that common purpose, which is having a good life and just being okay.
Absolutely.
We don't have to not be okay with someone else to just be okay within ourselves. So I really hope we can reiterate that. As far as how long it's going to take, my goodness, I don't know. It's, like a lot of the division, I think, and in Canada too, with respect to reconciliation, and also with respect to the big freedom convoy that just happened. I mean, it's interesting to see how Canada is on the international scene. I always think, my own rule of thumb is, if we make BBC News, we've done something. And, we were top of the BBC News 2 days in a row over that freedom convoy. And while there may have been some interesting and some well-meaning, work behind it, I think it also was quite lost.
Well, I think those that invest heavily in one opinion are going to take the longest to get back to some kind of normal where we can share. I think I said at the outset of one of our promos for the show that Paul and I could probably spend 2 days talking about things we've disagreed about over the years, but we've always found a way to kind of work together and even do things like this together, which I'm having a great time with. But it's going to take longer because those that invest a whole lot in being right in certain opinions, they're going to take a long time to come back. And I guess to Chrysandra's point, we're just going to have to be open to make it work. One of us has to be open to making sure that we can reconcile like that.
Absolutely. And I think that you make a great point that, we are working towards the same goal when it comes down to it, right? We all want that common goal of just kind of getting back to that normal, getting back to the way things were. And also just recognizing that, anxiety presents itself in so many different ways, right? Depending on our history, depending on, what our childhood was looking like, if we want to go back into trauma, right? And anxiety can look like fear, it can look like anger, it can look like frustration, it can look like depression, right? It can look like a whole bunch of those different things. So everyone is kind of acting on that same initial emotion, it's just presenting itself in different ways. So somebody who is really angry, that's kind of their way of defending themselves, right? Those are those walls that they have put up over time that they get their point across, or they protect themselves through anger. So I think just kind of keeping in mind that we're all kind of feeling the same way when it comes down to it. We're all afraid of that unknown, of that, chance of, things never going back to the way things were. And everyone has that same fear and anxiety around it. It just presents itself in different ways depending on the person. So just having that extra compassion and empathy.
Passion, huge.
So what have, and I want to ask all of you this because I think it's an important perspective. I want to ask, what has the pandemic done to change the way you're going to do your work and to some degree your life from this point forward? What about this pandemic has made you say, oh, we're going to have to, or I'm going to have to, because, not because I'm afraid a pandemic is going to keep going, but what have we learned that said, if I did this better, and I learned that because of the pandemic. Anything in your life, Paul, in the newspaper business that you've...
Yeah, one thing just that jumps out at me is to do a better job of explaining to people how we gather news and how we relay that, sort of a macro perspective on it, and explain, because quite often I'll get people complaining because you're not saying the other side of a certain debate, and there's a lot of false balance that goes on there where, just because 1% of the population thinks that, man-made climate change isn't real, it doesn't mean we should give it...
That'll be another show. We'll do that as another show.
Great point, though.
Doesn't mean we should give these things equal weight. And so even just like in letters to the editor, people will... If somebody has a letter to the editor that has a completely false premise, like just the starting point is just wrong, I don't run that letter to the editor. And then people complain, you're only writing letters to the editor that take your position. So, but sometimes I think we need to explain what we do. Newspapers, broadcast TV, everybody, they don't do a lot of explaining on the process. And I felt like I need to do more of that in whatever way I can. But it's changed the way we do everything. There's so much backlash to the media that we stopped. We turned off across the chain. I work for Black Press. We turned off commenting on Facebook posts on stories to do with COVID because the commenting became just vitriolic and just angry. And people can still share stories on their own pages and do whatever they want, but on the Chilliwack Progress Facebook page, you can't comment on a COVID story. Again, then people say, "Oh, you're censoring information." So it's had a big impact on us for sure. Yeah.
That is fascinating, and I think that what you talk about, this sort of vitriolic stuff being thrown around in comments, that's part of the frustration, that's part of the fear, that's part of just what the experience of being human, but being stuck inside and not having our normal outlets to go to. But I would also agree with you as far as I'm a science communicator. That's my role in the world. And I think that it's been a huge wake-up call, the pandemic. We can sit in our ivory tower and assume that we're doing a good job of communicating, but a lot of people don't understand things. And I don't think I have been doing a good enough job of reaching the very diverse audiences out there. So I would echo what you said, Paul. I think there's a lot we can do to communicate more effectively, understanding a little bit more now that there's such a diversity as far as experience goes, as far as perspective, culture, language, individual mental health. There's so much more to think about that we could potentially do better. But I would say, one thing that I've loved about the pandemic is just the facility to have meetings and to run classes online. I think, it's been a long time coming. We've wanted to transition a lot of university courses and potentially other courses and meetings to an online format. And I think the pandemic gave us, a really, really important and critical opportunity to do that. I don't know how quickly that would have happened otherwise. Probably not very.
Necessity being the mother or father of invention.
Absolutely.
So, Krysandra, how has it provided you with new insight into what you do as a professional and as a mom?
I think I I really echo what both of you have said, just about that understanding piece and being able to communicate effectively and kind of just for myself having more empathy and compassion and just giving myself an opportunity to think, okay, why is this person reacting the way they are? Why are they thinking the way they are? Is it, are they lashing out because they don't agree with me, or are they lashing out because it's just that's their way of protecting themselves, or that's their way of, of telling themselves that, everything is going to be okay and I just have to do this and it's going to be fine, right? So just really understanding where people are coming from and also, like I was mentioning, just the resiliency from a lot of the children is just kind of taking a page out of their book sometimes and just seeing how they treat each other when it comes to, being able to voice, them for themselves. And I've had, students and children saying, my mom and dad feel this way, but I don't. And so it's not always that kids are following in the footsteps of their parents. We see it sometimes, but kids are smart, and they're able to make up their own mind. And yes, they're influenced, and yet just like we all are, right? We're all influenced in one way or another, and it can be really easy to fall into that influence of the loud voice and that powerful, because nobody wants to feel like their rights are being taken away or like they're not in control of their own being. So, that kind of powerful, let's fight for our right is very, we want to gravitate toward that, right? And so I think just really taking the time to, instead of seeing somebody at face value, just kind of taking that time to really think about the whys of the behavior.
How did they get here?
Exactly, yeah.
And often if we're so consumed with taking something personally that they've said, then that just takes us in completely opposite direction. Such a valuable point.
Yeah, we get defensive, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of our instinct is a lot of the time, when I'm teaching kids how to communicate effectively or how to have conflict resolution, we teach a lot of I statements. I feel this when this happened. Because as soon as we start throwing around the yous, you did this and you are doing this, we automatically get defensive, right? We automatically are thinking of ways, how can I defend myself? How can I, let it known that that's not what I meant, or, I did this because of this. So we're not actually listening to what the other person's saying. We're spending that energy thinking about how we can defend ourselves. And so we're all entitled to our feelings, whether it be fear, whether it be anger, whether it be, excitement, sadness, whatever. I think it's just really taking into consideration how we communicate that and understanding that we all have different feelings in regards to the same thing. It's just presented differently.
Go ahead, Paul.
No, I was just going to say, I take, sometimes with my 9-year-old son, he's a 9-year-old boy, but like every day he'll say something and that is just like, oh yeah. Like I almost wanted to create like a Twitter feed, things my 9-year-old said. And regarding with everything, with relationships and friendships and the pandemic and rules and all that, and it's amazing the insight that they have, or naive insight or whatever it is. And we built up so much negativity as we get older. You really need to strip it down and see from their point of view sometimes.
Sometimes things are really simple.
Yeah.
We tend to make them a little
complicate
complications out of them.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Do we
absolutely.
ever.
You said you should just use I statements, and I'm going to say, you guys were fantastic. Thank you for such a wonderful conversation about a subject that I think we need to talk about moving forward from this point. I'm not allowed to say post-pandemic because we're not there, but moving forward from this point, I think you've provided tremendous insight into why we feel some of the things we feel, which is really important for families who are working with their kids and saying, okay, let's try to move forward. And I think a little insight, especially from our pal Paul here, about kindness. And, I've raged at editors of the newspaper, but not very often. But we have to show that kindness as we move forward. It's critically important if we're going to get past where we are today.
Kindness and understanding.
Huge thank you to you two for bringing those points out.
Yeah, thanks very much
And to
for
Paul
coming.
for bringing that out of you as well. We're exploring a whole range of topics on this new adventure. Paul and I are involved in Hames and Henderson, Chilliwack Now.
Squared.
H squared,
Oh, I like that.
which is,
Good name
that's
for
very
anybody.
good, yeah. I've got an idea for a logo.
Okay.
Paul. But it's just been fascinating and fun. I hope our viewers have enjoyed this chat as well. And we'll see you next time on Hames and... That's where you say
Him.
Henderson. There we go.
It's him.
He's slow at his cues, but
Yeah,
we'll get him picked up. Thanks so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.